My father-in-law was so obsessed with proving I had an affair, he drugged my infant son to steal his DNA. When I found the evidence, my husband, I didn't just cut him off, we sold the company he loved. The air in my in-laws' dining room always felt managed. It was a carefully climate-controlled environment, not just in temperature, but in emotion. Every Sunday, we'd gather around the heavy mahogany table that my father-in-law, Robert, had bought 30 years ago, a monument to his own perceived success. The silver was always polished to a blinding shine, the roast beef cooked to a precise medium rare, and the conversation flowed along channels that Robert himself had carved over decades of patriarchal rule. For 7 years, I had learned to navigate these currents. For 7 years, I smiled, passed the gravy, and kept the more inconvenient parts of my personality tucked away. My husband, Jake, would sit beside me, his hand often finding mine under the table, a small, silent apology for the undercurrents I could so clearly feel. He loved me, I never doubted that. But he had been raised in this polished cage, and to him, the bars were just a normal part of the decor. Tonight was no different. Our 10-month-old son, Leo, was asleep in his travel crib in the quiet den, a small, perfect being blissfully unaware of the complex web he'd been born into. "The market's tough," Robert announced, slicing into his beef with unnecessary force. "A lot of builders are going under. Good thing you've got a steady hand, Jake. Built a solid business." He beamed at his son, his pride radiating across the table. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I had a lot of help, Dad." Robert waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense. It's in the blood. Hard work. Good sense." I felt the familiar, gentle squeeze from Jake's hand. He was acknowledging me, but silently, always silently. I thought of the $150,000 of inheritance my grandmother had left me, the money that had been the entire seed fund for Jake's business, the money that had allowed him to buy equipment and hire his first crew without going into a mountain of debt. It was a fact Robert and his daughter, Lisa, seemed to suffer from a very specific and convenient form of amnesia about. "Well, a family's foundation is built at home," Robert continued, his eyes flicking to me for a fraction of a second. It was a familiar jab, a thinly veiled critique of my career as an architect. A man needs that stability to thrive. In the early years, I would have let the comment slide, my silence a small stone dropped into a deep well of resentment. But motherhood had forged something new in me, a protective spine of steel. I gave a polite, measured smile. "You're right, Robert," I said, my voice pleasant. "And the foundation of our little family is mutual support. That's why I'm so proud of how my career and Jake's business allow us to build a great life for Leo together." The air thickened for a moment. Robert's chewing slowed. Lisa, Jake's older sister, jumped in with her signature brand of saccharine poison. "Oh, Dad, leave her be. We can't all be traditional. Besides, Claire is so lucky she has you and Mom to help with Leo, since she's always so busy." She smiled at me, a perfect hollow gesture. Later, while helping my mother-in-law, Carol, clear the plates, I saw Lisa follow her into the pantry. Carol was a quiet woman, her edges worn smooth by years of orbiting her husband's immense gravity. The pantry door didn't quite close, and Lisa's voice, now stripped of its sweetness, drifted out. "I just worry about Jake," she murmured. "Clara seems so detached sometimes. Always on her phone, you know. It's probably work, but still. It looks secretive." A piece of ice formed in my stomach. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a campaign. I saw it with a sudden, stark clarity. I was an outsider, a variable Robert couldn't control, and Lisa, in her quiet, jealous way, was his willing accomplice. That night, long after Jake was asleep, his steady breathing a comfort and a frustration, I sat up in bed. The house was still, bathed in the cool glow of a street lamp outside our window. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, judged, and plotted against. My anxiety was a frantic bird beating its wings inside my chest. But then, another feeling rose to meet it: anger. A cold, clear anger that demanded more than just silent endurance. I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up my face in the darkness. I opened anew, password-protected note. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the keyboard. It felt dramatic, paranoid even. But the words I'd overheard in the pantry were not a paranoid delusion. They were real. I typed. Title: Family Interactions. Entry 1, June 14th. Sunday dinner. Robert's usual comments about my career. Lisa's remark to Carol about me being secretive. Feeling is no longer just discomfort. It feels coordinated. This is the first time I'm writing it down. I need to remember. I locked the phone and placed it back on the nightstand. The frantic bird in my chest was a little quieter now. It was as if by naming the poison, I had taken the first small step toward finding an antidote. I didn't know what I was building, what this secret log would become, but I knew I couldn't afford to be naive anymore. My son was sleeping in the next room, and I was his foundation. I had to be solid. I had to be smart. The weeks that followed were masterclass in psychological warfare. The jabs became more frequent, the questions more intrusive. Clara, what was the name of that colleague you traveled with to that conference in Chicago last year? Robert would ask out of the blue, his eyes sharp and assessing over the rim of his reading glasses. It was a team of 4, Robert, David, Sarah, and Michael. Why? Just curious. A man should know who his daughter-in-law is spending time with. Each question was a small spade, digging at the roots of my life, my integrity. And each one was meticulously recorded in my phone. Entry 2, June 21st. Robert asked about the Chicago conference again. He's fixated on it. Made a point of saying a man should know. The implication was clear. Entry 3, June 28th. Lisa helpfully pointed out that Leo has my eyes, but she can't see any of Jake in his face shape. She said it in front of the entire family. Jake laughed it off, but the comment hung in the air like smoke. I was living in a state of high alert, my senses tuned to the nuances of every word, every glance. I was an architect, trained to see the structural weaknesses in a building. I was now applying that same skill to my own family, and I was discovering that the entire edifice was rotten to the core. The campaign escalated under the guise of generosity. Suddenly, Robert and Lisa were constantly, almost aggressively, offering to babysit Leo. "You look so tired, Clara," Lisa would say, her voice dripping with false concern. "Let Dad and me take Leo for the afternoon. You deserve a break. Go get a massage or something. We'd love to have him," Robert would add, his tone leaving no room for refusal. It's important for a boy to bond with his grandfather. Their insistence felt less like a kindness and more like a strategy. They wanted access. Jake, bless his heart, saw it as a sign that his family was finally warming to me, that they were making an effort. See, he'd say, a hopeful light in his eyes. "I told you they'd come around. They adore Leo." I let them. I let them because fighting it would have meant a huge confrontation, one I knew Jake wasn't ready for. And a small, exhausted part of me desperately needed the break. But I was never at ease. I would watch the clock, my muscles tight, until the moment I could go and retrieve my son. It was during this period that I started creating the baby memory box. It was my small act of rebellion against the tension, a way to focus on the pure, untainted love I had for my son. I found a beautiful wooden chest at an antique store and began filling it with treasures. Leo's tiny hospital bracelet with his name printed in faded ink. The first pacifier he'd ever used, a soft, downy lock of hair from his first trim, tied with a blue ribbon. His first pair of impossibly small socks. It was a tangible collection of our first precious months together. I kept it on the dresser in his nursery. One Tuesday afternoon, Robert babysat for 3 hours while I had a series of back-to-back work meetings over Zoom in my home office. When I came out, he was bouncing a happy Leo on his knee. Everything seemed normal. He left, and I went into the nursery to change Leo's diaper. My heart stopped. The box was gone. It wasn't just misplaced. It wasn't pushed to the side. The space on the dresser where it had sat for weeks was empty. A cold dread, sharp and metallic, filled my mouth. I searched the room, my movements becoming more frantic. I checked under the crib, in the closet, behind the changing table. Nothing. I called Jake, my voice tight. He came home immediately, concern etched on his face. Then I called Robert. "A box?" he said, his voice a perfect study of grandfatherly confusion. No, I didn't see any box, dear. What did it look like? It was a wooden chest, Robert, on the dresser. You must have seen it. Honestly, Clara, I was focused on my grandson, not the decorations. Are you sure you know where you left it? You've been under a lot of stress lately. Lisa called an hour later, no doubt dispatched by her father. Dad told me you lost Leo's memory box. Oh, Clara, I'm so sorry. You're probably just exhausted and misplaced it. It'll turn up when you least expect it. The gaslighting was so seamless, so perfectly executed, it was almost brilliant. They were a team, reflecting my own reality back at me, distorted and twisted until I was the one who seemed unstable. Jake tried to help, searching the entire house with me. But even he, in a quiet moment, said, "Maybe it's in one of the closets? We can look again tomorrow when we're fresh." He didn't believe me. Not really. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of isolation. That night, my entry in the secret log was shaking with rage. Entry 5, October 5th. He stole it. Robert stole Leo's memory box. I know he did. He and Lisa are pretending I'm crazy. Jake is trying to be supportive, but I can see the doubt in his eyes. The box had Leo's hair in it. His pacifier. Things with his DNA on them. My God, is that what this is about? The thought was so monstrous, I felt physically ill. But it fit. All the pieces clicked into place with a horrifying snap. The questions about my travel. The comments about Leo's appearance. The coordinated campaign to get access to my son. A month later, the final act occurred. Jake had to fly out of state for a 2-day work emergency. It was sudden, and I was left alone with Leo, a looming project deadline, and a splitting migraine that had started that morning. The pain was a blinding white light behind my eyes. By noon, I could barely function. My phone rang. It was Robert. Heard Jake had to leave town, he said, his voice oozing concern. How are you and the little guy holding up? I'm okay. I lied, the words feeling like sand in my mouth. You don't sound okay. You sound tired. Listen, I'm 5 minutes away. Let me come over and watch Leo. You go lie down. You can't take care of him properly if you're not well. Every instinct screamed no, but the pain was relentless, and Leo was starting to get fussy. I felt weak, defeated. Okay, Robert, I whispered. Okay. He arrived, and I handed over my son, my precious boy. I explained that I just needed to lie down for an hour. Take all the time you need, he said, shooing me towards the stairs. We'll be fine. I stumbled upstairs, took a painkiller, and fell into a heavy, dreamless sleep. When I woke, the house was unnaturally quiet. The clock on my nightstand read 4:15 p.m. I had been asleep for almost 4 hours. A wave of guilt washed over me, followed by a prickle of unease. I walked downstairs, my headache finally gone, but replaced by a low thrum of anxiety. I found Robert in the nursery. He was standing over the crib, his back to me. Leo was lying inside, perfectly still. Robert didn't hear me enter. He was so focused on Leo, he jumped when I said his name. Clara, you're awake, he said, turning around quickly. His face was flushed, his smile strained. He was wonderful. Just got a bit fussy a little while ago, so I put him down. He finally just fell asleep. Something was wrong. Leo was a terrible napper. He never just fell asleep on his own in his crib, and he was lying too still. I walked over to the crib. Leo's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow. He looked listless, drugged. The word exploded in my mind. He seems really out of it, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Oh, you know babies. When they crash hard, Robert said, already gathering his things, moving towards the door with an uncharacteristic haste. Well, I should get going. Let her mom know I'll be home for dinner. He was gone before I could say another word. I leaned over the crib and gently touched Leo's cheek. He barely stirred. The alarm bells in my head were now deafening sirens. I looked around the room, my eyes scanning for anything out of place. And then I saw it, tucked into the side pocket of the diaper bag. A bag Robert had brought with him, filled with his own supplies, was a small, half-empty bottle of children's liquid Benadryl. Beside it, I saw the corner of a plastic wrapper. I reached in with trembling fingers and pulled it out. It was a sealed, sterile lab baggie containing a long oral swab, the kind used for collecting saliva samples. The world tilted on its axis. He hadn't just stolen my son's things. He had drugged my 10-month-old child to get a DNA sample. The memory box was a trial run. This was the main event. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A terrifying, ice-cold clarity washed over me. The time for doubt, for fear, for giving the benefit of the doubt, was over. My hands, surprisingly steady, picked to my phone. First, I took photos. The bottle of Benadryl next to the lab swab. The half-empty level of the liquid. A video of Leo, his unnatural stillness, his shallow breathing. Second, I opened my laptop, went straight to a medical website, and looked up the dosage of Benadryl for an infant of Leo's exact weight. The amount missing from the bottle was nearly 3 times the recommended maximum. It was a dangerously high dose. Third, I called the 24/7 pediatrician hotline listed on our fridge. I calmly, clinically explained what I had found and the symptoms my son was exhibiting. The nurse on the other end was silent for a moment. Then her voice came back, sharp with professional alarm. "Ma'am, what you're describing is a significant overdose for a child that age. It can cause severe sedation and respiratory depression. You need to monitor his breathing very closely. Frankly, what you're describing is not just medically dangerous, it's child endangerment." Her words were the final, external validation I needed. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was a crime scene. Only then, armed with photos, data, and a medical professional's opinion, did I call Jake. He answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful. "Hey, how are my 2 favorite people?" I took a breath. My voice came out flat, cold, and devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a woman who had been pushed past every conceivable limit. "Jake, you need to come home. Now. What's wrong? Is Leo okay?" "Your father drugged our son," I said. "I have photos, and I've spoken with medical staff. What he did wasn't just inappropriate. It was a crime. Get on the next flight." I hung up before he could respond. The war had begun, and I was going to finish it. The next 24 hours were a blur of controlled fury. Jake caught a red-eye flight, arriving home in the early morning, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. I didn't need to rage or cry to convince him. I simply laid out the evidence on our coffee table like a prosecutor presenting her case. The photos, the video of our listless son, the notes from my call with the pediatrician. I told him about the secret log on my phone, about the missing memory box, about the months of calculated questions and whispers. I watched his denial crumble, replaced by a slow dawning, sickening guilt. He finally saw the cage he'd been raised in, not as his home, but as the trap it had always been. "I'm so sorry, Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you." "We'll protect him now," I said, my voice hard. Together, we made the call that afternoon. We summoned them all to our house, Robert, Carol, and Lisa. We told them it was an emergency regarding Leo. It was the only way to ensure they would all come. They arrived together, a united front, their faces arranged in masks of concern. Robert stepped forward first. "What's wrong? Is the boy all right?" "He's fine," Jake said, his voice a low growl I'd never heard from him before. He blocked Robert's path toward the hallway. "No thanks to you. Sit down." The command, so unlike my peacemaking husband, stunned them into obedience. They sat on the sofa opposite us, a panel of judges about to be judged. I placed the small Benadryl bottle on the coffee table between us. Then the sealed lab swab. "Explain this," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. Robert stared at the items. A flicker of panic crossed his face before being replaced by a mask of defiant self-righteousness. He knew he was caught. He didn't care. "I did what I had to do," he said, his chin jutting out. He looked not at me, but at Jake. "I was protecting my son. This is what a father does." "Protecting me from what?" Jake shot back, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "From her." Robert's voice rose, finally pointing a trembling finger at me. "She was never right for you, always with her career, her secrets. That boy, he didn't look enough like you, Jake. Her stories about her work trips never added up. I had to be sure. A man has to protect his bloodline. I ordered a discreet paternity test. I used the pacifier from that box she made such a fuss about. The confession, so brazen and devoid of remorse, hung in the air, thick and toxic. He had admitted to everything, the theft, the premeditation, the drugging, as if they were reasonable, even noble, actions. It was Carol who broke first. My mother-in-law, a woman I had only ever known as a shadow, a whisper, a passive reflection of her husband's will, made a sound, a choked, guttural sob. "Robert, no," she whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears streamed down her pale cheeks. He shot her a warning look, but for the first time in what was probably 40 years, she ignored it. The dam of her silence had finally burst. She turned to Jake, her eyes pleading. "He's been obsessed ever since you told us Clara was pregnant. It's because of his father." "Carol, you be quiet," Robert snapped. "No." Her voice, though trembling, was suddenly clear and strong. "I will not be quiet. Not while you endanger my grandson." She looked at Jake and me. Robert's father, he had an affair. It produced a son. We didn't find out until after he died, when the will was read. It tore the family apart, lost us half our inheritance. Robert has lived in terror of it happening again. He's been projecting his father's sins, his own trauma, onto you, Clara. I've watched this poison grow in him for 40 years. I tried to tell him he was wrong, that you were a good wife, a good mother, but he wouldn't listen. The revelation explained the pathology, the deep, twisted root of his obsession. It didn't excuse it, but it laid it bare. Jake, his face ashen, turned to his sister. "Lisa, did you know about this? Did you know he was going to drug my son?" Lisa's face was a theatrical mask of horror. She was a better actor than I'd ever realized. "What? No, of course not," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "How could you even think I'd be part of something so horrible? Dad told me he was worried. Yes, but I never, ever thought he would go this far. I would never hurt Leo." Her denial was flawless. For a split second, she was almost believable. But then Carol, filled with the righteous fury of a grandmother betrayed, reached into her purse. "You're a liar, Lisa." She pulled out her phone. Her hands are shaking violently, but she held it up for us all to see. On the screen was a photo, a picture she had taken of Lisa's phone when she'd left on the kitchen counter just 2 days before. It was a series of texts between Lisa and Robert. "Lisa, did you get the sample yet? Clara is getting suspicious about the box. Robert, I'll handle it tomorrow while she's down with that migraine. Just make sure Jake stays out of town. Lisa, perfect. She won't suspect a thing." The room fell into a dead, profound silence. The digital words glowed with a malevolent light, stripping Lisa's lies bare. Her face went from theatrical tears to the stark, white terror of being caught. Jake stared at his sister, and I saw the last vestiges of his old family loyalty die in his eyes. He was looking at a stranger. The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. It now sat with us. I was the one who spoke first, my voice steady and cold. I looked directly at Robert. "Your legacy isn't in a name on a truck, Robert. It's in the trust you build. You burned it to the ground for a ghost that lived in your own head." Jake stood up, a towering figure of resolved fury. He stood beside me, a true partner. "We've already filed a police report for child endangerment. Our lawyer is filing a restraining order against both of you tomorrow." He let that sink in. Robert and Lisa stared, speechless. But Jake wasn't finished. He was ready to deliver the final, symbolic execution. "And as for the business," he said, his voice laced with ice. "As for Robert and Son Construction, as of today, that company no longer exists." Robert's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "We are dissolving the business," Jake stated, each word a hammer blow. "We're selling the assets, every truck, every tool, every contract. It's over. You built your entire identity on that name, Dad. Now it's worth nothing. We're moving. We're starting over. And you will not be a part of our lives." Robert's face, so full of arrogant certainty just moments before, crumpled. He looked suddenly old, defeated, and small. He had tried to protect his bloodline, his legacy, and in his paranoia, he had single-handedly destroyed it all. The days that followed were the demolition phase of our old life. There was a grim satisfaction in the methodical work of tearing everything down. Our lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Albright, was horrified by our story and moved with swift efficiency. The restraining order against Robert and Lisa was granted, legally barring them from coming within 500 feet of us or our home. The police report created an official, permanent record of Robert's actions. While the district attorney ultimately decided against pressing criminal charges, citing the complexities of proving intent in a family dispute without a more serious physical injury. The official record was a weapon in itself. It was a documented truth that could not be denied. The fallout was immediate. Robert and Lisa, shocked out of their arrogance and into a state of frantic panic, tried to launch a counteroffensive. There were tearful voicemails, manipulative texts, and attempts to rally other family members to their cause. They tried to paint me as a vindictive, unforgiving monster, and Jake as a brainwashed husband, tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. But we had the truth, and we had proof. Jake, with a heavy heart, sent a single, concise email to the extended family. He attached the photo of Lisa's texts and a summary from the pediatrician about the dangers of the overdose. He didn't ask them to take sides. He simply laid out the facts. The campaign of whispers Robert and Lisa had waged against me was instantly neutralized by a tidal wave of undeniable evidence. The calls to us stopped. The family, for the most part, went silent, retreating in shame and shock. Robert and Lisa were left on an island of their own making. The most public and satisfying consequence, however, was the dismantling of the business. We hired a commercial broker who specialized in liquidating assets. The iconic blue and white trucks with Robert and Son Construction emblazoned on the side were lined up in the company yard and sold one by one. The large sign by the road, the one Robert had posed proudly in front of for a local newspaper article 5 years ago, was taken down. We sold the equipment, the client list, the goodwill. Robert, who lived only a few miles away, was forced to watch his life's work, his very name, be sold off for parts. It was a public and thorough humiliation, a direct consequence of his private and heinous actions. 6 months later, the world was a different color. The oppressive gray of our old life had been replaced by the warm, golden light of a new one. We had moved 3 states away, to a smaller city nestled by a lake. Our new house was modest compared to our old one, but its walls held no ghosts. They held only the sounds of Leo's happy babbling and the quiet hum of a life being rebuilt on a new, solid foundation. The process had been grueling. We were both in therapy, working through the complex trauma. Jake was grappling with the profound grief of losing the family he thought he had, and the guilt of his own blindness. I was learning to trust again, learning that setting a boundary wasn't an act of aggression, but an act of self-preservation. Our marriage, which could have easily shattered under the strain, had been forged into something stronger in the fire. We were a team, welded together by the crisis we had survived. One afternoon, I was sitting at our new dining table, which was covered in blueprints. I was on a video call with Ms. Albright, finalizing the last of the paperwork to officially dissolve the corporation that had been Robert and Son Construction. My voice was clear and confident as I discussed liability clauses and tax implications. I was in command of every detail. "Well, Clara, that's it," Ms. Albright said, a rare smile on her face. "The books are closed. You're officially free and clear. Thank you for everything," I said, a wave of profound relief washing over me. After the call, I walked to the large window in our living room. Outside, in the green expanse of our new backyard, Jake was pushing Leo on a swing set he'd spent the last weekend building. Leo's delighted squeals echoed in the crisp autumn air. Jake looked up and saw me watching. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and my heart felt calm. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years was gone. In its place was a quiet, sturdy peace. I had thought family was a fortress you were born into, a structure you had to accept, no matter how cracked its walls or how dark its rooms. Now I knew that sometimes family is a cage you have to be brave enough to leave. The loudest voices aren't always the ones telling the truth, and the quietest people can hold the most incredible strength. We didn't just set a boundary. We built a new world for ourselves on the other side of it. We chose our child's safety over our parents' approval, and our own peace over a toxic, hollow legacy. It was the hardest and best decision we ever made. To anyone out there feeling trapped by obligation, feeling like your own voice is being drowned out by the demands of others, I have to ask, what would you be willing to do to protect your own peace?